friends, welcome to today's broadcast. My name is Emmanuel Sam, and today on our leadership broadcast we are going to be looking at the subject of wealth. I'd like to take us through a brief journey or expository on the concept of wealth. You know, we live in a time of tremendous wealth, even though it isn't evenly distributed, especially in this part of the country and in this part of our world. We live in a moment and a season and a time of tremendous wealth. And so it's important that we get the true concept of wealth so that we'll be able to maximize value in this present time and dispensation. Wealth isn't about money. Wealth is actually a supply word. And there are three basic components that you could call the three legs or the tripod stand of wealth. The first one is wisdom. Wisdom is always the principal thing. In every concept, in everything that we get involved in, wisdom is always paramount. So the first leg is wealth, is wisdom. The second is relationships. And then the third, of course, is value. You know, we sometimes think wealth is all about money. When we don't harmonize these three components, what happens is that we actually become barbaric toward one another. You know, we begin to be selfish. We destroy one another, we kill one another, we hurt one another, consciously or unconsciously, intentionally or unintentionally. And all of these are the major challenges that leaders have to grapple with. You see, sometimes as leaders, especially in the economic sphere, in the political sphere, and within the context of corporate organizations and institutions, we may not always agree with each other. But when there is wisdom, there will always be even distribution of wealth with minimal hurt. Most of the crises that people go through in organizations, in circles of political influence, as it were, especially in Africa, where there is a lot of lack of transparency and accountability in leadership. One of the issues that we have to grapple with isn't actually that leaders are wicked. It's actually a problem of a lack of wisdom. When people have wisdom, there is a way they operate. When people have wisdom, there is a way they function. When people have wisdom, there is a way they structure themselves to be able to build. When people have wisdom, even opposing forces, there is always a harmonizing point where we could work together. We may not like each other, but we have to respect each other within the boundaries of our work disposition and jurisdictions. Now, when it comes to matters of leadership, we must always pull sentiment out. Objectivity must come to the foreplay. You know, most people believe in sentiment. Well, that may not really matter when it has to do with matters of leadership and leadership development. Wisdom will cause synergy founded on objectivity and keeping out sentiments. Most of the internal challenges, organizational upheaval, sometimes the organizational health is really challenged as a result of lack of wisdom. As I speak to a couple of organizations, I meet a couple of CEOs and management, general managers and all of that, I begin to realize that most of the challenges that we have isn't really about people being wicked or people being self-centered, as it were. It's simply a lack of wisdom. I mean, nobody in their right senses will actually want to hurt the other person when there is a way that they could do things to their advantage with minimal hurt to the other person, and then everybody goes home satisfied and feeling a sense of fulfillment. And so lack of wisdom is the challenge. However, wisdom is in various dimensions, and of course, not everyone is going to accept it, but I'm going to prove it to us. In our country, for instance, at the moment, the federal government has released a couple of funds for distribution to people, and it is said that in the north, a couple of northern leaders are carrying this round about their constituents or their constituencies and ensuring that their youths are carried along. Well, in the southern part of Nigeria, that is not the case. Maybe in a few states, but that's not the case all around. Now, this is as a result of lack of wisdom. Most of these people who are in positions of authority will want to build companies, will want to build industries. When you don't understand the need to build people at the expense of profit making, what happens is that you build a castle that will eventually collapse. When you esteem profit above people, you're setting a trap. Structures are sustained by individuals, not by money. If there are no individuals in a building, no matter how beautiful that building is, it begins to depreciate in value. The very air that people breathe cleanses the atmosphere. Now, a place can be a desert and have so many beautiful structures there, except there are people there. Life comes because there are people there. When there is no life, there is death. We begin to see that most people don't have wisdom to understand that when you build organizations and infrastructure and you don't have the quality of people to be able to manage this infrastructure, what happens is that there is infrastructural decay. This is as a result of lack of wisdom. And so right now, we are grappling with a lot of issues in our country and our nation, as it were. But I want to ask a question. Are we ready to take responsibility if we actually have wisdom? Wisdom always comes with responsibility. However, I'm going to leave it at that for now, and I'll proceed to the next point. The next point is relationships. Sometimes, beyond money, what we need is valuable relationships. Valuable relationships. When we have valuable relationships, our aspirations find a good ground to be nurtured into fruition. Quality relationships enhance the dignity of individuals as well as teams and corporate structures and institutions. Positive relationships. This isn't because we need to benefit anything from each other, as it were. However, productivity is always ignited when sound minds come together to reason out issues. Productivity is always ignited in an environment of sound minds. We cannot but begin to consciously build ourselves so that we can be beneficial to everyone around us. Quality relationships. You see, the natural inclination or tendency is to always think of how we can always survive first. According to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, man will always think of how to eat and how to feed and all of that. Well, those things are primary. But could we discipline ourselves such that we can esteem personal value first above survival? There is need for an ideological reorientation, an ideological shift if we have to move forward as individuals, as corporate citizens of our great nation Nigeria and Africa as a whole, because we have this scourge of a survival orientation that came from slavery, consciously and consistently and continually being imposed through the curriculum of our academic institutions, from and through our political orientations. These colonial curriculums are being reintroduced in subtle channels, in subtle ways, thereby keeping us impoverished in the mind and depriving us of, a fruitful coexistence. And so it's always about survival, where the rich, most of the rich, the wealthy, especially in the political class, are threatened by the young generation rising, or by the younger generation being able to match their financial status. It isn't supposed to be. When we value relationships, we are going to understand the need for mentorship. When we value relationships, we are going to understand the need for allowing people around us to also grow, so that we can always find a common ground for nurturing and helping each other in the place of our aspirations, stirring up right motivations in our hearts and minds, and then complementing each other in the areas of our deficiencies. Relationships really matter. Sometimes people are not able to get into favorable environments, and people don't have favorable dispositions because they don't understand the power of relationships. However, there are several components that make up for becoming someone who can, open up to, classic and expedient relationships. There are relationships that are for the now, there are relationships for the future. However, the ability to discern and sustain the right kind of relationships comes from wisdom. That's why wisdom has to come first, and then relationship comes second. Quality relationships expand our capacity to grow from being individuals into becoming structures. Quality relationships enhance our inherent capacity so that we can grow and evolve from being individuals into becoming structures. This is why we need quality relationships. When people aren't emphatical about the kind of relationships that they're going to, their lives won't have a bearing. We must be intentional about the kind of relationships that we keep. And all of these are going to bring us into the place where we can become people of value and significance. And so, relationships, wisdom, and then relationships. And then the third point is the subject of value or currency. Another word for money is value. Now, I prefer using currency or value to money. The reason is this: most of the time, what we actually need to become people of significance or to build wealth or influence isn't the physical money, but inherent potential. Capital, in the economic sense, when we say capital, people always think about money. We talk about in management, when we talk about capital, we begin to talk about money. We're going to talk about, facility. We're going to talk about equipment and all of that. Well, at the foundation of capital is potential, skills, talents, giftings. Wisdom causes you to understand how to introduce and, deliver your potential within the context of the relationships that you built over a particular time frame. Wisdom, I repeat, helps us to know how to introduce as well as distribute and deliver our inherent potential, giftings, talents, within the circles of relationships that we've been able to build over time. So you begin to see that more important than money is inherent value content. Yeah, we must emphasize inherent value above money, because when one who is unwise find themselves, in a state of financial affluence, money becomes a tool of oppression. And this has always been the challenge. We've always chased after money at the expense of value. Because when you begin to think of value, you will now see the need to learn the principles that sustain value. You cannot be talking about value distribution, value dissemination without principles. Principles help to sustain your value. Principles help to sustain the legitimacy of your inherent value. Principles, they help to sustain the legitimacy of your inherent value. And so, when you begin to think about value, you begin to be self-motivated toward knowledge, because you need knowledge to sustain the value, to be able to know how to effectively deliver the value contents that you have within. And we say knowledge, wisdom, understanding, counsel, all of this come together. Because sometimes you need input from here and there, that's counsel. There is need for knowledge, and there's need for you to understand how to apply the wisdom you have within the context of the knowledge that you've gotten. And so, wisdom, relationships, and inherent value. These are the three legs of wealth. And this must begin to inform how we structure the ideology of future generations, beginning from the curriculums of the academic sector, beginning from the nursery school, the primary school. We must begin to inculcate this. Yeah, most of the time, we do this unconsciously. But we must be very intentional. The beauty of wisdom is tied to the fact that there is intentionality in its application process. The beauty of wisdom, or the manifestation of wisdom within, is tied to the fact that there is an intentionality attached to, its application. And so there must be a reorientation where we begin to reorient people that value is more important than money. It takes value for you to know how to convert raw materials into materials of economic value. And so when we de-emphasize the foundation and begin to build a structure, the structure is going to collapse. We must get back to foundations. We must get back to basics. These realities must be framed into the new ideological framework, which is meant to inform our, national orientation. Is meant to inform our national disposition as a country. It's meant to inform our continental disposition, Africa. The scourge and the memory of slavery has robbed us of so much, such that most of the time we are scared of becoming ourselves. And when people are scared of becoming themselves, they begin to tie themselves to pseudo value. That's what happens when people chase money at the expense of value. It stirs up pride without reason. It stirs up a contaminated attitude. It stirs up arrogance. And then when there is a breach, in the flow of the systems, by reason of knowledge gaps, wealth gaps, and by reason of, a gap between the older and the younger generation, because of an oppressive mentality towards the younger generation, what eventually begins to happen is that laxity becomes the order of the day. This is why a couple of youths today, a lot of youths want to work, but there are also a lot of youths who hate work and seek the fast lane. And so the dignity of labor is actually trashed because the older generation have not deemed it worthy or expedient to consciously build up the younger generation to begin to recognize and esteem the concept of dignity of labor. You cannot do this when you are kleptomaniac in your operations and your administrations. You can't. You can't teach people values when you are not one who upholds values. You can't teach people the need for, integrity and judicious living when leaders don't have accountability and aren't operating with integrity. You cannot give out what you don't have. And the legitimacy of whatever you instruct is tied to the fact that you carry the same authority. In other words, you have to live what you practice. And so, right now, I mean, it's good, it's fine, distribution of wealth, palliatives, loan schemes and all that. But it takes knowledge and wisdom to even know how to be able to multiply these financial resources, rather than people just having to feed off these resources. It takes knowledge and wisdom. So we have to consciously determine and decide that we as a people are going to put our feet on the ground and begin to reconnect the dots where there has been schisms, where there has been misconceptions, where there has been, challenges in the ideological framework of our nation. That is where we have to get back and begin to address issues. When we begin to address issues from the foundations, then we can be sure that the society, the ideal society, which for those who are progressives, we aspire to build, we are actually going to get there. We have to get back into the ideological framings, into the philosophical belief systems, into the values orientations. Morality has been on the low because, from all indications, and in my opinion, our leaders haven't lived it out, and so they cannot enforce it. We have to get back. We cannot keep deceiving ourselves. Oh, money will come and go. When someone has values, when a nation is a nation of values, it is fixed. See what's going on in the United States of America today? It's a clash of values. It's a clash of ideologies. When there are challenges in a nation, when there's a challenge in a state, when there's a challenge in a populace, let us not always go into looking for things or looking for ideas, external ideas. Challenges always come from within. And if we look deep and decide to, take off our minds of sentiments, ethnic bias and the likes, and focus on how we can rebuild, then we now have to begin to establish foundations, the right foundations about the context, proper contextualization, and redefinition of subject matters. We must get back to definitions. We must get back to the principal definition of things so that we can address facts, raise up the next generation in such a way that we are sure that we begin to build step by step, and then a sustainable legacy becomes the template for the future generations. I hope you've been greatly impacted by today's broadcast. All right? And so, until next week, see you at the top. Thank you.